5 female veteran humiliated at horse showcase. Until her Mustang leaves everyone speechless. They laughed when she stepped into the arena. With her worn-out clothes, a rusty old truck, and a nameless horse, she was the joke of the showcase. A washed-up veteran clinging to the last shreds of dignity. No one knew the extraordinary past she and the horse beside her carried. And when the music began, every mocking word fell silent. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe. Heat seemed to cling to the rolling hills of southern Texas. Even at dawn, the sun, fierce and unrelenting, cast rays across the corrugated metal roof of the small horse stable, highlighting every dent and rust patch. Occasional gusts of dry wind kicked up dust along the dirt yard, swirling it in lazy eddies before carrying it away. Apart from those faint disturbances, silence reigned, broken only by the distant crow of a pup and the rhythmic clop of hooves on hard-packed ground. Grace Whitaker, a tall and lean woman of 59, stood at the edge of her ranch, taking in the early light. She was once a combat medic in Afghanistan many years before, long enough that her hair had turned a weathered gray, and she had settled into a quiet routine on this inherited patch of land. A jagged scar ran down her right forearm, evidence of the shrapnel that nearly took her life when an IED exploded just outside a makeshift clinic. While many would hide such a disfigurement, Grace never bothered. She left it exposed as a reminder of past battles won, both outwardly and within. After her honorable discharge, she returned to Texas with hopes of finding a new normal. Instead, she found a world that had moved on. Her parents had passed during her deployment, leaving her the crumbling Whitaker Ranch, a property she remembered fondly from childhood summers, but had rarely visited in adulthood. The land itself was tired, fences leaning, barns with rotting timber, and the main house in need of constant patching. Yet from the moment she set foot back on that dusty soil, Grace felt a certain pull. Perhaps it was the silence, or the wide-open sky that reminded her of the stark Afghani horizon. Or maybe it was that this place was hers, in a world where she'd always answered to someone else's orders. She did not marry, nor did she entertain the notion of a settled family life. Years of service and personal tragedy had carved a solitary path. Her only daughter, Lily's mother, had passed away a few years prior, a heartbreak Grace seldom discussed. The memories sat heavy, but she wore them much like she did her scar, with straightforward acceptance rather than shame. Every morning Grace rose before the sun had fully broken. She would brew coffee, its bitter aroma mingling with the dusty air, and take a slow walk around the stable. The battered boards creaked under her boots. She knew exactly where to step to avoid the worst of the rut. Her movements had a certain regimented grace, a trait she had carried over from her military life. There was purpose in everything she did, from sliding open the stable door to the way she brushed each horse. While she owned few animals, they were well cared for. They recognized the steadiness of her hand and the calm patience in her voice. On that particular morning, she wore a faded flannel shirt that had seen better days, a pair of old jeans, and a sun-bleached cowboy hat. Her face, tanned and lined, seldom broke into a smile, but when she did soften, it was like a small light flickering in a long, dim corridor. The scar on her right arm was visible from wrist to elbow, slightly raised and uneven, the skin pulled taut at the edge. She never hid it. It was merely one more testament to the life she had led before. Despite the cracks in the barn walls, the ranch still felt like a sanctuary. There was a sense of order here that reminded her of base camps she had served in overseas, the same raw combination of discipline and unpredictability. She oversaw it all with the stoicism of someone who had learned that every day is a gift, even if it comes wrapped in hardship. As the last notes of morning quiet receded, Grace stepped toward the corral to check on the creature that had recently become her most faithful companion, a horse named Storm. Storm stood near a leaning wooden fence, his coat a swirl of ash gray and mottled white. He was neither tall nor especially muscular, yet he possessed a certain alertness that set him apart. Grace had found him 5 years earlier near a deep ravine right after one of the worst summer storms to hit the region in decades. At first she thought he was dead. He was so emaciated and caked with mud that his eyes barely registered her presence. One leg bore a swollen gash that needed careful cleaning to stave off infection. With a huff that sounded more like resignation than fear, he allowed her to guide him onto a makeshift trailer and bring him to Whitaker Ranch. She hadn't brought him home with the intention of mastering him. She simply wanted to see if he still had the will to live. If he pulled through, great. If not, she figured she would at least give him comfort in his final days. But Storm demonstrated a resilience that reminded Grace all too well of a young soldier refusing to succumb to his wound. Under her diligent care and basic veterinary skills acquired in the military, he began to heal. His malnourished frame slowly regained shape and the infection in his leg receded. Gradually, she noticed something unusual about him. Though clearly unaccustomed to human contact, he never bit, never kicked, and never flinched. He was wary, his ears pinned back whenever anyone approached too suddenly. But he was not hostile. It was a silent mutual respect. She didn't crowd him, and he in turn let her close. Over time, she started teaching him little cues, shifting her weight left or right, tapping lightly on his shoulder with the rope. Incredibly, Storm picked it all up without the tension or rebellion typical of a wild horse. No need for a whip, no need for harsh commands. He followed her signals as if they were second nature. It was during many sleepless nights that Grace realized she found solace, simply by watching him breathe. Sometimes memories of battlefield trauma swept through her, the whine of distant mortar shells resonating in her dreams. She'd wake with her heart pounding and slip out to the stable. Storm would often be awake too, stamping softly or flicking his ears at nocturnal noises. The presence of that battered Mustang did more for Grace's nerves than any medication or therapy session. She would rest a hand on his neck, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his pulse as he stood calmly, a living fortress against the storms of her past. Eventually, she accepted what her instincts had been telling her. This was no ordinary horse. She couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way his eyes locked onto hers, or the precision with which he responded to her slightest gesture. There was a quiet intelligence in him, akin to a well-trained soldier who needed only a glance from his commander. Grace began suspecting that somewhere in Storm's lineage lay a specialized strain of Mustang or a breed once used for cavalry. She also sensed in some intangible way that both of them had been underestimated most of their lives. Late one morning, the rumble of a powerful engine broke the ranch's peaceful hum. A sleek black Ford F-350, polished to a mirror finish, roared onto the dusty yard, raising clouds of grit that danced in the hot wind. Behind it trailed a pristine horse trailer, large enough to hold 2 or 3 champion stallions. Grace glanced up from where she was reinforcing a broken fence post. She narrowed her eyes but said nothing as the truck stopped a few yards away. Stepping out first was Chuck Redford, a stout man in his early 60s wearing a flashy silk shirt that strained against his round belly. His cowboy hat was immaculate, a testament to wealth and vanity rather than honest ranch work. Close behind him emerged Travis Redford, his 30-year-old son, tall and lean with an unmistakable swagger. Travis's face bore the perpetual smirk of someone who believed he was better than everyone else. With a theatrical wave, Chuck greeted her. "Well, if it isn't Miss Grace Whitaker," he said, his tone thick with condescension. "Didn't think we'd see you out here in the middle of nowhere." Grace nodded curtly, half wishing she could ignore them. She spotted 2 immense glossy thoroughbreds peering out from the trailer's side windows, each wearing braided manes and polished tack. The Redford estate was known for turning out high-profile show horses, a breed quite different from the rugged animals Grace was used to. Chuck fished a neatly folded pamphlet from his shirt pocket and extended it in Grace's direction. "We've come to offer you an invitation to the National Horsemanship Showcase in San Antonio," he announced. "Heck, they'll let anyone sign up these days. Always need some colorful local flavor to entertain the crowd." Travis shifted his stance, noticing Storm standing quietly near the corral fence. With a small contemptuous laugh, he said, "Still talking to that scruffy horse like it can understand you, Miss Whitaker." Grace paused a moment before responding, her gaze sliding from Travis back to Storm. "He understands more than you think," she replied evenly. She took the pamphlet from Chuck's outstretched hand, scanning it briefly. Its glossy finish and bold lettering showcased shining trophies and grand arena. She didn't say yes or no, instead she held onto it without comment, eyes reflecting a calm defiance. Chuck chuckled as though he had confirmed some private suspicion. "If you ever get the nerve to come to San Antonio," he said, turning back to the truck, "I do hope you give us all a good laugh." Travis, mounting one of the thoroughbreds to circle the yard, kicked up a flurry of dust in front of Storm. The Mustang scarcely flinched, only blinking against the swirling haze. Chuck, noticing the lack of reaction, glared at Storm with mild confusion. He muttered something under his breath before calling to his son, Together they pulled away, the truck's engine roaring once more. Grace watched them leave, jaw set, knuckles white around the pamphlet's edges. She glanced at Storm, who returned her look with serene indifference. In the distance, the thoroughbreds whinnied as if laughing with their owners at this humble ranch and its ragtag occupant. But Grace remained silent. She had no interest in petty comebacks. If she was to respond, it would be on her own terms, not theirs. 15-year-old Lily stood by the upstairs window in the ranch house, sketchbook in hand. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the raised voices and the gleaming truck below had drawn her attention. She watched Chuck and Travis depart, saw the condescending glances they'd thrown at Grace, and felt her cheeks flush with anger. Once the visitors were gone, Lily set her sketchbook aside and went downstairs, determined to say something. She found Grace near the front porch, the pamphlet still in hand. Lily was a petite girl with a quiet demeanor, more likely to be found reading under a tree than confronting bullies. She had lost her mother, Grace's daughter, some years back, and that heartbreak had formed a special bond between grandmother and granddaughter. Even though Grace didn't share her feelings easily, Lily understood the woman's guarded heart better than anyone else did. "Those men were rude," Lily said softly, stepping out onto the porch. A gentle breeze ruffled her hair. "But maybe that's exactly why you need to go. To prove them wrong." Grace slipped the pamphlet into her back pocket, exhaling a slow breath. "It's just a fancy show, Lily. People like them, it's all about who has the biggest name, the most expensive gear." Lily gave a small smile, holding up her sketchbook, which contained dozens of quick pencil drawings of Storm in various poses. "They can measure saddles and trophies if they want. But can they measure what Storm can do? If we never show them, they'll keep thinking it's all about bloodlines and money." She paused, looking out at Storm's pen. "He's special, Grandma. And so are you." Grace didn't answer immediately. She squinted at the horizon, where the sun was beginning its climb into a sky so bright it was almost white. In that hush, Lily added, "They'll only ever see him as a nobody horse on a dying ranch, unless we prove otherwise." It wasn't a demand or a plea. Lily's voice carried a simple, resolute truth. Grace turned to face her granddaughter, and for a moment her hardened features softened. "We'll see," she said eventually, the closest she came to an admission that Lily's words had reached her. Later that evening, Grace went into a long Userness storage room. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light coming through a narrow window. She pulled out a small wooden chest, flipping open the rusted clasps. Inside lay her father's old leather saddle, darkened with age but still in one piece. Its silver conchos glinted faintly in the dim room. Storm stood in the corral, ears pricked forward as if aware of some new development. Grace carried the saddle out and draped it gently over the fence. The Mustang regarded it curiously, then shifted his gaze to her. It was as if he knew that saddle meant more than just a ride. It was the bridging of past and present, the old and the new. A quiet vow passed between them, needing no words. "If we do this, we do it for ourselves, not for them." Dawn broke over Whitaker Ranch with the same stark intensity that had settled there the day before. Yet something in the air felt different, charged as though a faint electricity rippled through the dusty yard. The old confrontation with the Redfords seemed to linger on every wooden beam and fence post, as though the land itself had witnessed the veiled insults and was holding its breath for what came next. Grace Whitaker awoke before the rooster crowed, moving with her usual brisk efficiency. She brewed coffee, black, no sugar, and sipped it on the front porch. Her eyes scanned the horizon, then drifted toward the barn. Sunlight was merely a suggestion at this hour, but she could already see Storm's outline near the stable gate. He stood quietly, ears pricked as if he too was anticipating something important. She set her coffee mug down and walked across the yard. The dry Texas heat brushed against her skin even at this early hour, but she noticed how her steps felt lighter than usual. There was still the memory of Chuck Redford's sneering voice, of Travis spurring his show horse to kick up clouds of dirt. Yet that memory did not weigh her down. If anything, it spurred her forward. She paused at the entrance to Storm's stall, leaning on the gate for a moment to watch him. His calm, dark eyes flickered over to her. He had been pacing earlier, but the moment he recognized her presence, he stilled. She inhaled slowly, letting her gaze wander the length of his gray coat, with faint streaks of white around the wither. A patch of pink skin from an old injury showed on his flank, scar tissue from when she first found him. Even that flaw had become part of his quiet mystique, a testament to resilience rather than weakness. After a moment, she stepped inside, carrying the weathered wooden box containing her father's antique saddle. It bore the marks of decades past, small scratches from trail rides, worn spots where the rider's thighs would press. She had not touched this saddle in 30 years, ever since her father died and left the ranch in limbo. Now she planned to give it a second life, as though reclaiming a piece of familial legacy. Setting the saddle on a workbench against the stall wall, Grace opened the box of leather oil and brushes. Storm let out a soft snort, lowering his head to inspect the unfamiliar items. She ran a hand along his muzzle. "Easy," she murmured. "We've got work to do." That entire morning felt like a ritual. The stable was quiet save for Lily's occasional footsteps and the faint clinks of metal buckles. Grace spread a rag on the bench and carefully laid the saddle across it. Every inch had to be cleaned, reconditioned. She approached this task with the same methodical seriousness she once reserved for sterilizing medical equipment in Afghanistan. Lily joined her, rummaging through a small toolkit. "Here," the 15-year-old said gently, handing Grace a tin of neatsfoot oil. She also held up a spool of sturdy thread for any stitching that needed reinforcing. "I can clean the bridle if you like." Grace nodded. "Thank you." She cast Lily a sideways glance, noticing how the girl moved with careful deliberation. Despite her youth, Lily had an almost preternatural calm that mirrored Storm's. Perhaps it was the shared grief of losing Lily's mother, Grace's daughter, that gave them this unspoken bond. While Lily polished the bridle, she occasionally reached out to stroke Storm's neck. "We're almost set, aren't we?" she whispered, as though the Mustang could understand every word. Storm twitched his ears, leaning fractionally closer to her. Grace watched this exchange with a slight lift of her eyebrows. It still amazed her how Storm trusted Lily so wholeheartedly. Most horses would be skittish at the smell of leather oil and the bustle of preparation. Storm, however, stood motionless, head tilted as though listening to their every breath. It was as if he had been waiting for exactly this moment, for the day they would not simply exist on the ranch, but venture out and show the world what a nobody horse could do. When Grace finished oiling the saddle, she placed it on Storm's back without fully securing it. She was testing his reaction, half expecting a jitter, a sidestep, anything that might betray hidden nerve. But Storm simply rolled his shoulders, exhaled, and settled his weight evenly on all four legs. "You've been ready for this a long time, haven't you, boy?" Grace murmured, patting his withers. She caught Lily's eyes across the stall and saw a faint, encouraging grin. The corner of Grace's own mouth twitched in response. Quiet excitement brewed between them. The next day, Grace and Lily drove into the nearby town of Fairhaven, an unassuming cluster of feed stores, a diner, and a few roadside shops. The late morning sun glared off the GMC's dusty windshield as they parked outside Rasmussen's farm supply. Stepping inside, Lily grabbed a cart while Grace scanned her shopping list. Oats, mineral salts, and a certain brand of salve for Storm's old scar. As they moved through the aisles, passers-by threw them curious glances. Word spreads quickly in small towns, and people had apparently heard rumors about Grace's Mustang, especially after Chuck Redford's mocking invitation. Some gazes were pitying, others skeptical. Grace pretended not to notice, though Lily stiffened at the attention. At the checkout, a lean man in his early 30s wearing a chambray shirt and an old felt cowboy hat approached them. He gave a polite nod. "Morning," he said, in a level voice that seemed a touch formal. Grace returned his nod. "Morning," she replied curtly, her usual wariness settling in. "Name's Cole Anderson," the man continued. "Dr. Cole Anderson, technically. I'm the new veterinarian in Fairhaven." He offered a handshake. When Grace accepted, he gripped her hand with a respectful firmness. I've been wanting to introduce myself, especially after hearing about your horse." Grace's brow furrowed. "My horse, Storm," Cole clarified. "Word around town is you've got a Mustang that's not quite ordinary. And I'm not speaking of gossip. I actually saw you with him at that Veterans Benefit event last year." Lily's eyes lit up. "The one near the old fairgrounds." Cole nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Your grandmother didn't realize it, but I caught a glimpse of how she got that horse to settle during a fireworks test run. He stayed calm even with explosions overhead. That's not something you see every day." Grace pursed her lips, remembering that night well. It was a test run for a fireworks show on the 4th of July, and the sudden blasts had triggered her old anxieties, the memories of mortar shells and distant deserts. Storm had sensed her fear and stood so still, so comforting that she'd been able to steady her breathing by stroking his mane. She never imagined anyone else was paying attention. Cole cleared his throat. Anyway, I heard you might be traveling soon to that big horse showcase in San Antonio. He paused, glancing at Lily, then back at Grace. If it's all right with you, Sergeant Whitaker, I'd love to check Storm's health before you make the trip. No charge. I just admire the connection you two share. Grace was silent for a moment, measuring him with her eye. He had the confident posture of someone who knew his craft, but lacked the arrogance that usually accompanied such skill. All right, she said finally. Tomorrow afternoon you can drop by. Cole nodded appreciatively. Thank you. As he turned to go, he added, my father served in the same division as you, by the way. William Anderson. He always spoke highly of you and your medical skills in the field. Surprise flickered across Grace's features. William Anderson? He was in charge of supply runs near the Kunar province. She recalled a tall man with a disarming smile, always quick to share rations with the local children. Cole's face broke into a grin. That's right, he said. I guess it really is a small world. Grace offered no further comment. She merely gave a faint nod, but Lily could sense the subtle thaw in her grandmother's guarded demeanor. Sometimes it took a personal connection to breach the armor of solitude. Grace wore like a second skin. True to his word, Cole arrived at Whitaker Ranch the following afternoon. He drove a well-used SUV rather than a flashy truck, pulling up near the main barn. Grace noted the veterinarian's professional but low-key style. No flamboyant airs, just a simple black tool case slung over his shoulder. He greeted Lily with a friendly wave, then turned to Grace, who gestured for him to follow her to Storm's stall. Storm's out back in the corral, she explained. Easier to examine him outdoors. Storm stood in the corner of the corral, flicking his tail at Fly. As Cole approached, the Mustang's ears rotated forward, but he made no move to retreat. Cole began with standard procedures, checking the horse's heartbeat, respiration, eyes and teeth. Storm lowered his head calmly, allowing the stethoscope to press against his flank. A small frown of concentration passed over Cole's face. I'm used to Mustangs being edgy during exams, he said softly. But he's letting me do whatever I need. That's rare. He then lifted one of Storm's hooves, running a gloved hand along the past. Hoof health looks good. Could use a trim soon, but nothing problematic. Grace watched silently. Lily hovered at the corral gate, notebook in hand. She'd recently begun jotting down everything relevant to Storm's well-being. Cole next tested the horse's joints, gently bending each knee. He muttered. For a once-injured leg, the range of motion is excellent. I see no sign of limp or stiffness, which is unusual considering the wound you described. That's Storm, Lily said with a proud smile. He's a survivor. Cole moved around to examine Storm's hindquarters. Look here, he noted, pointing at the well-defined muscles along the rump. Perfect symmetry. It's almost like he was bred for athletic performance. I rarely see that in wild-caught horses. His voice carried a note of intrigue. It's as if, he paused, choosing his carefully. Someone with expert knowledge might have had a hand in his lineage. Grace's expression tightened slightly. I found him battered and starved near Cactus Bend. If there's a special lineage, I wouldn't know. Cole accepted her statement with a slow nod, continuing the exam. After another 10 minutes of thorough checks, he stepped back, removing his gloves. He's in remarkable shape. He summarized. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. And if you're planning to showcase him, well, you might just turn some heads. He wiped his brow with a rag. I don't mean to pry, he said. Quieter now. But do you remember that veterans event last year? I saw you both near the fireworks test. It was like you were calming each other. In my experience, horses usually spook with loud blasts, but Storm stayed as still as a statue. Grace felt a flicker of old memories, the shock wave rattling her bones, the bright flashes turning the night sky into a war zone in her mind. Storm had not run away. Instead, he pressed closer to her, blocking out the chaos. She'd always chalked that up to good fortune or the horse's unusual temperament, but she had never tried to dissect it further. When I saw that, Cole continued, I realized you weren't just riding a horse. You were communicating with a soul. It reminded me of the Bond cavalry troopers, sometimes form with their mounts, one forged in life for meth situations. I can't say I know much about cavalry, Grace replied, perhaps more sharply than intended. She looked away a moment, unsettled by the vulnerability of discussing her worst nightmare. But yeah, Storm's special. Cole's gaze was understanding. Special is a good word, he agreed. If there's any horse who belongs on a national stage, I'd wager it's him. He glanced around the modest ranch. And if there's any person who can show the world what he can do, it's you. Though she didn't voice it, Grace felt an odd swirl of gratitude. She pressed her lips together in a tight, fleeting smile. Thank you, she said. I appreciate the help. Early dawn on the day of departure found Grace and Lily loading supplies into the battered GMC truck. The morning air was already heavy with heat. Grace double-checked the mechanical state of the vehicle, though her face betrayed concern. The tires were worn, the brakes had a habit of squeaking, and the engine often rattled ominously. Still, the cost of a replacement was out of reach, and she had no choice but to trust it one last time. Storm boarded the makeshift horse trailer without fuss. The trailer itself was little more than a wooden frame reinforced by metal bars, with a tarp to shield him from the worst of the sun. It worried Grace that the rig might not hold up, but she had to try. Lily stowed a cooler of food, sandwiches, water jugs, and some fresh fruit, and climbed into the passenger seat. We'll take it slow, Lily said, almost as if reading Grace's mind. We have time before the check-in closes. Grace started the engine, grimacing at the rough idle. She revved it gently, coaxing the truck into motion. As they pulled out of Whitaker Ranch, a flock of crows took flight from a nearby oak tree, as though bearing witness to their departure. Maybe an omen, Grace thought with a wry smile. Good or bad, only time would tell. Hours drifted by as they traversed winding roads flanked by scrubland and the occasional rocky outcrop. Lily dozed off occasionally, lulled by the steady hum of the engine and the crackle of an old radio that played dusty country tune. Grace sometimes hummed along to songs like Simple Man or Ring of Fire, more out of nostalgia than any real love for the music. The monotony was broken only by stops to check on Storm or refill the truck's ever-thirsty radiator with water from battered canteen. In the early afternoon, they approached a stretch of cracked desert known as Cactus Bend. The road shimmered in the scorching sunlight, giving the illusion of water on the horizon. Suddenly, a loud pop hissed from under the hood, followed by thick black smoke billowing out in a suffocating cloud. Grace swore under her breath and braked hard, causing the truck to screech as it lurched to a stop. Lily jerked forward, but her seatbelt held. Are you okay? Grace asked, heart pounding. I'm fine, Lily replied, shakily, eyes wide. From the trailer they heard Storm pawing the floor, disturbed by the sudden halt. Grace shut off the engine and jumped out, the heat slamming into her like a physical force. She flipped the hood open only to recoil at a blast of steam. Damn it, she muttered. Water pump's gone. Maybe the whole cooling system. She surveyed the empty desert around them. No phone signal, no sign of other vehicles, just a vacant stretch of land that seemed to extend forever. Half an hour crawled by. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Lily tried to wave off the flies that gathered around the hood. Grace used the last of their drinking water to cool the engine, but it was clear the GMC wasn't going anywhere. Storm sounded restless behind the trailer's partition. Each time Grace peered in, she murmured reassuring words, though her own anxieties gnawed at her. Then, like a small miracle, the low rumble of a powerful diesel engine reached their ears. Grace glanced up the road to see a sleek silver horse trailer approaching, shimmering in the relentless sun. Her throat tightened when she recognized the Redford Estate logo emblazoned on the side. She grit her teeth, unsure if this was fate or one final humiliation. The big rig slowed and parked a dozen yards behind them. Dust swirled briefly, obscuring its driver's side door. To her surprise, Cole Anderson stepped out, wearing a plain white t-shirt and a battered cowboy hat. He raised a hand in greeting, an apologetic cast to his features. Hey, he called. I'm not exactly proud of my ride. Chuck insisted I travel with his crew, then I saw your truck from a distance. Figured I'd better stop. Grace felt a twinge of conflicting emotions, relief, annoyance, gratitude, and caution all at once. Chuck's in there with you, she asked, nodding at the trailer. Cole shook his head. He's asleep in the front seat. Long night, I guess. I told the driver to pull over when I recognized your truck, he lowered his voice. If you want, I can help you load Storm onto our trailer. There's extra space. It's well ventilated and I'll make sure Chuck keeps his mouth shut. His gaze flickered between Grace and the battered GMC. You're not going anywhere in this heat if the cooling system's shut. Grace exhaled, scanning the horizon. White sand, cacti, and not a shred of shade. Lily stood by Storm's trailer, stroking the Mustang's muzzle in an attempt to keep him calm. The horse stomped once, flicking his tail. The difference between survival and collapse in the desert could be a matter of hours. Storm was strong, but no animal could endure the triple-digit temperatures locked in a broken-down trailer for very long. All right, Grace said at last. She glanced at Lily. We don't have much of a choice. Lily nodded in agreement, relief evident on her face. Together, they carefully transferred Storm into the spacious silver trailer. He seemed momentarily unsure, sniffing at the polished interior that smelled of expensive feed and cleaning agents. But Lily cooed gentle encouragement. It's okay, buddy, she whispered, running her hand along Storm's neck. We'll get you to San Antonio safe. A quiet snort from Storm, followed by a calm step forward, sealed the decision. Cole helped secure him in a larger stall, adjusting the partitions so Storm would have ample room to turn around. His voice remained soothing, his motions unhurried. I promise I'll keep an eye on him, Cole said in an undertone. I'll ride in the back with him if necessary. Chuck might throw a fit, but I don't care. Grace lowered her gaze, her pride warring with necessity. Thank you. I appreciate this. Her words were terse, but in them Cole heard genuine gratitude. Lily slid the trailer door shut, patting Storm's muzzle through the small side window. She leaned close, whispering, He's not sleeping, you know. He's listening. He always is. Cole offered Grace a faint smile. Let's get you both to San Antonio, Sergeant. We can figure out the rest after you've shown everyone what Storm can really do. With that, they climbed into the Redford Ridge. The diesel engine roared to life once more, and the small caravan, now oddly united, continued its journey across the sun-scorched desert, heading toward a showdown none of them could fully predict. Grace Whitaker squinted against the late morning sun as the temporary rig carrying Storm pulled into the vast parking lot of the San Antonio Horse Complex. The place was like a world unto itself, a small city dedicated to horses, competition, and showmanship. White fence stables stretched off in neat rows along immaculately paved walkways, and staff in matching polo shirts zipped around on golf carts. Everywhere she looked, glossy trailers, many of them custom-wrapped in metallic finishes, bore the names of high-end ranches from Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and beyond. In contrast, Grace arrived with her battered GMC in tow, half-clicked from the desert breakdown, and the name Whitaker Ranch printed in small peeling letters on the side of her cobbled-together trailer. The truck coughed as she parked near an official check-in station, a small kiosk overshadowed by bright flags fluttering in the wind. Lily hopped out first, scanning the busy scene with wide eyes. She clutched a binder of paperwork and maps, shifting from foot to foot with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Storm, for his part, remained calm. The trip had been far from glamorous. He had spent part of it in the Redford trailer, after all. But his disposition was tranquil enough that Lily suspected he might even be enjoying the new sights and scents. He snorted softly at the swirl of fresh manure and hay in the air. Grace took the lead, stepping up to a staff member at the kiosk who wore a neatly pressed uniform and an earpiece. The woman checked a list on a clipboard. When Grace gave her name, the attendant's eyebrows rose slightly. Then her gaze flickered toward the makeshift trailer. Whitaker, Grace Whitaker, the attendant repeated, forcing a polite smile. Yes, here you are. She thumbed through some forms. You'll be assigned a stall 29, it's down that way near the far end. Lily noticed a momentary hesitation in the attendant's demeanor, as though she was trying to mask a hint of surprise or disapproval. Grace, however, simply nodded. Got it, thank you. She took the paperwork without further comment. From behind, two men in spotless riding attire moved up in line. One of them discreetly glanced at Grace's trailer and murmured something to his companion. Both laughed under their breath before turning away. Lily pursed her lips, bristling at the dismissive attitude. She wanted to say something clever in response, but Grace put a hand on her shoulder, guiding her forward with quiet firmness. They made their way along a paved lane flanked by rows of pristine stables. Each stall seemed more luxurious than the last, complete with polished nameplates, fresh white paint and rows of ribbons hanging in proud display. Lily marveled at how this place contrasted so sharply with the rugged, dusty intimacy of Whitaker Ranch. Here, everything gleamed, and the faint hum of water sprinklers drifted through the air. Large fans hung in each corridor, keeping the stables cool. It was clear that only top-dollar animals and big-money owners usually found a home in such well-tended barns. Eventually, they reached the far end of the complex, where the manicured surroundings gave way to more dated, worn-out facility. A chipped sign reading Stall 29-34 pointed to a side path, its letters peeling. The alley beyond was dim, stuffy, and smelled faintly of mildew. The roof overhead had multiple rusty patches, and near a sagging corner, Lily spotted an old half-collapsed hay storage area. Stall 29, Grace said, stopping in front of a door with flaking paint. Must be here. The stall itself was cramped and damp, the boards warped from years of exposure. A broken faucet dripped steadily into a shallow drain. Not far away, a humming generator powered a cluster of overhead lights that flickered at intervals. Lily wrinkled her nose. I thought this was supposed to be a professional show, she muttered, stepping gingerly around a puddle. Grace let out a dry chuckle. Sometimes the game starts at the bottom of the scoreboard. Lily, she said, echoing her own earlier words. Don't worry, storms survived worse than this. They set about clearing space inside the stall, rummaging around for stray nails or anything that could injure Storm. As they worked, a telltale clip-clop approached from behind. Lily looked up in time to see Travis Redford riding a stunning Appaloosa with a flame-colored coat. He stopped just short of the stall door, angling the horse so that it stared down at Lily and Grace from a slightly higher vantage. Well, look who finally made it, Travis drawled. He tilted his hat back, eyes flicking dismissively across the cramped surroundings. They assigned you to exactly the right spot. Fits the vibe of your old ranch, wouldn't you say? Grace, squaring her shoulders, turned to face him. Lily opened her mouth, ready to snap back, but Grace shook her head. We'll make do, Grace said simply. How's your father? Travis's smirk twitched. Chuck's preparing our real stables near the front. You'll see them once you wander over if you make it that far. He leaned forward in the saddle, lowering his voice. Seriously, Whitaker, do yourself a favor and leave before you embarrass yourself. Everyone knows you're outclassed here. His eyes flicked to Lily, who stared back defiantly. Before Lily could retort, Grace rested a calming hand on her granddaughter's arm. We don't scare so easily. Her tone was mild but resolute. Not anymore. Travis clicked his tongue, turning his horse away. Fine, he said, tossing the words over his shoulder. Suit yourself. I just hope you're ready for a real show. With that, he spurred the Appaloosa, which trotted off in a swirl of dust. The clatter of hooves echoed down the corridor until it faded into the bustle of the complex beyond. Lily gritted her teeth, taking a deep breath. He's impossible. I can't stand him. Grace exhaled slowly, gaze lingering on the place where Travis had disappeared. It's not the first time they've backed me into a corner, she muttered, half under her breath, but it might just be the last time they'll regret it. She cleared her throat, then motioned toward the trailer. Let's get Storm settled. We have a long evening ahead. Night fell on the San Antonio horse complex with surprising swiftness. The floodlights around the main arenas lit up, casting a neon glow across the white fences and walkway. Some of the upscale stables hummed with aftermouth chatter, owners bragging about their horses' bloodlines, trainers giving last-minute instructions, the occasional pop of a champagne cork. But in the back corner near stall 29, it was quiet, almost eerily. Lily had finished arranging her and Grace's meager accommodations in a tiny side room attached to the stall. The space barely fit a camp bed and an ancient oscillating fan that squeaked intermittently. Meanwhile, Grace checked on Storm's feed, ensuring he had enough hay and water to last through the night. The Mustang seemed calm, swishing his tail at the occasional mosquito. She gave him a gentle pat along the flank and murmured, "We'll prove them wrong tomorrow." Close to midnight, Lily lay on the creaky bed, sifting through one of her many notebooks. Every so often, the pipe-thin walls reverberated with the distant hum of machinery or the shuffle of passers-by. Eventually, Lily drifted off, lulled by exhaustion and the faint hope that tomorrow would bring a fair chance for them and Storm. At around 2 in the morning, a sudden thudding of hooves startled her awake. The stable corridor echoed with Storm's agitated snorts and the hollow slam of wood. Lily bolted upright, Grandma. Grace was already on her feet, throwing on her boots. She hurried to the stall, Lily at her heels. Their flashlight beams revealed Storm pawing the ground and throwing his head up. The whites of his eyes were visible, and his breathing came in short, forceful puffs. He rammed the stall door with his shoulder, as though trying to rid himself of some itch or irritation. "Easy, Storm," Grace said, stepping forward, voice calm but urgent. She ran a hand over his neck and felt him tremble. Something was wrong. She scanned the stall and froze when she noticed an unusual clump of hay in the corner. It looked fresher, greener, but also slick and giving off a pungent smell. Grace crouched down and gingerly reached out, pressing her fingers into it. The material clung to her skin, leaving behind a faint tingle that quickly turned into a mild burning sensation. She flinched. Lily hovered behind her, voice tight with alarm. "What is that?" Grace lifted her fingers to her nose, recoiling at the acrid, spicy odor. "Some sort of chemical agent," she said softly, recalling memories of improvised sabotage she'd seen in far-off bases. Storm snorted again, stamping the floor as though it stung him. Grace shone the flashlight on his muzzle and discovered his lower lip inflamed. The flesh irritated and reddened. The realization sunk in fast. "They laced his feed," Grace murmured, trying to keep her voice steady. Lily let out a gasp, eyes wide with horror. "Who would do that?" Lily demanded. "They're trying to poison him or make him go wild." Grace forced herself to stay composed. She grabbed a bucket, adding cool water from the tap. "We can't say for sure who, but I have a damn good guess," she muttered, swirling a packet of salt into the water. "Storm, easy now, boy. I'll flush your mouth out." She took a clean rag, dipping it into the salt water mixture, and gently applying it to Storm's swollen lip. He jerked his head initially, but seemed to trust her enough to let her continue. Lily stood by, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to cry out, to storm off and accuse Travis or any of the Redford hands. But Grace's steely focus reminded Lily that now was not the time for emotional outbursts. A swirl of anger, memories of Afghanistan flooding back, roiled inside Grace. She recalled how enemy infiltrators sometimes tampered with ration packs. Soldiers would become sick or delirious at the worst times. This felt like the same dirty tactic, targeting the horse's well-being to break the competitor's spirit. "It's a cheap, cowardly trick," she hissed under her breath. Storm let out a trembling sigh as Grace pressed the rag to his irritated lips, wiping away the lingering residue. Though still agitated, he gradually calmed under her reassuring touch, and Lily's gentle words of comfort. "We'll get you through this," Lily whispered, gently stroking his neck. Half an hour passed and the stench of the tainted hay lingered in the stall. Grace scooped it out with a pitchfork, dumping the suspicious clumps in a sealed plastic bag. She'd decided to keep the evidence just in case. Just as she finished bundling it up, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Cole Anderson appeared, looking slightly disheveled, as if he'd rushed over without a second thought. He wore a simple hoodie over his jeans, and in one hand he carried a small duffel of veterinary supplies. His gaze fell on Storm, whose muzzle was still slightly swollen, then on Grace and Lily. "I saw the light," he said quietly. "Figured something was wrong." Grace grunted in acknowledgement. Without wasting time, Cole placed his duffel on a nearby bench and pulled out a small tube of anti-inflammatory gel. He approached Storm with calm efficiency, applying the gel to the reddened areas. Storm tossed his head once, then settled again as the cool ointment soothed him. "Any idea who did this?" Cole asked, though his tone implied he already suspected. Racy's tight-lipped grimace served as an answer. Lily glanced away, tears still glistening. "Look at this hay," Lily said quietly, handing him the sealed bag. Cole sniffed near the plastic, then crinkled his nose. "Smells chemical, maybe chili oil or something more potent. Hard to say. It's definitely not normal feed." He exhaled slowly. "People can be vicious when there's money or pride involved." Grace's face darkened. "They're trying to mess with him before we even get on the field." Cole nodded, then lowered his voice. "Came from the Redford stable, didn't it?" She gave a subtle shrug. "It wasn't from my supply. Stall 29 was stocked this afternoon with basic hay from the staff here. Somebody replaced it or tampered with it." She jerked her head toward the corner of the stable, where a second stack of cinder-blocked hay remained untouched. That's the original pile," This new stuff definitely wasn't ours. Turning to Storm, Cole checked the horse's eyes and breathing. Well, the good news is, it doesn't look like permanent damage. He'll be uncomfortable, but he'll recover. The swelling should go down in a few hours if we keep rinsing and applying gel. Relief fluttered across Lily's face. Thank God. Grace set her jaw. Thank you for showing up when you did. Cole offered a small nod. I was over by the Redford area. Chuck's out late bragging about something I'd planned on heading back to the motel, but then I noticed your light was on. Figured I'd see if you needed help. Grace appreciated that Cole seemed genuinely concerned, not meddlesome. She glanced at Storm, who was now standing more quietly, though his eyes still showed a lingering tension. You mentioned earlier that you suspect Storm might have a lineage. Someone doesn't want us to know, she said, voice low. Cole hesitated. He looked at Lily, then back to Grace. I don't have proof, but his physical traits, his calm under stress, the way he reads human intention, these are hallmarks of specialized breeding, not just random Mustang genes. There's a real chance he comes from a line used for cavalry or advanced equine program. If that's the case and someone else knows about it, it could upset a lot of established breeders, especially those who've invested in certain bloodlines. The stable's overhead light flickered, casting shadows that danced across Storm's flank. Grace's brow furrowed. You're saying there's more at stake than just winning a trophy? Potentially, Cole answered. If Storm's connected to a rare or defunct line, it might overshadow existing champion stocks that can threaten reputations and profits for big ranches. Lily took a shaky breath. So someone tried to sabotage us to keep Storm from competing or to make him fail spectacularly. Cole nodded gravely. Exactly. This might not be the last attempt. Grace set her hand on Storm's shoulder, feeling the powerful muscle underneath. He had survived injury and the desert's relentless heat. She had survived war and heartbreak. Neither of them was about to fold because of some cheap trick. We'll see this through, she said, voice steady. Then she added more softly, thank you for your help. Cole began packing up his supplies. If you need anything else, let me know. I'll be around. He shot a meaningful glance at the sealed plastic bag on the ground. And keep that. Might come in handy if you decide to file a formal complaint. As the veterinarian left, Lily exhaled, hugging herself as if warding off an unseen chill. I hate this, she admitted. I hate that people would stoop so low. Grace gave her granddaughter a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. That's how the world can be, she murmured. But we won't stoop with them. Storm let out a soft nicker, drawing Grace's attention back to him. She stroked his mane slowly. We've got a lot of work ahead, buddy, she said, but I've never known you to back down. With the stall door firmly latched and a fresh supply of water within easy reach, Grace turned off the overhead lights. She and Lily slipped back into their cramped side room. The night's tension still crackled in the air, but Storm's breathing returned to a steady, comforting rhythm. On the far side of the stable area, the hum of faint voices continued. Somewhere out there, the Redfords and their entourage might be plotting the next move. Yet, as Grace settled onto the small cot, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. They had come this far, crossed deserts, faced condescension and thwarted one sabotage attempt. She had overcome worse in her life, and so had Storm. Tomorrow they would enter the ring battered but unbroken. She could still feel the low warmth of the Mustang's breath against her hand, a silent promise that they were in this together. A final flicker of the overhead bulb cast dancing shadows on the wall. Lily, head bowed, whispered something that Grace couldn't quite make out, perhaps a plea for good luck or a prayer for safety. Grace closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. Whatever happened next, she would be ready. The stage was set, and the first moves of a larger game had begun. They would meet it head-on, together. Morning sunlight cascaded over the San Antonio horse complex, like a spotlight welcoming its cast to the stage. Already the main arena was packed with spectators eager for the day's performances. An electric tension hovered in the air. Show teams milled about. Last-minute checks were made on horses draped in immaculate blankets, and the stands buzzed with chatter about favorites, betting pools, and the possibility of sensational debuts. As the loudspeakers cycled through announcements for each competitor, the crowd roared or murmured with anticipation. High in the bleachers, cameras perched on tripods, operators scanning the ring for the next big moment to capture. Grace Whitaker stood behind the tall double doors leading into the main arena. She inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp morning dryness catch in her throat. Her pulse thumped in her ears, but her expression remained composed. Beside her, Storm waited with the kind of stoic calm that only came from a profound trust between horse and handler. His coat gleamed under the overhead lights, the swirl of gray and white shimmering like living marble. Lily had done her best to smooth his mane and tail, though the Mustang's aura was more rugged nobility than polished showmanship. A short distance away, a ring official signaled for the previous act to exit. Applause rippled through the stadium and the announcer's voice boomed across the loudspeakers. And that was Sapphire Ranch, with their prize stallion, King's Fortune, next up representing stall 29. The announcer paused as if double-checking the list. Grace Whitaker riding Storm. A whisper of curiosity spread through the crowd. Stall 29 was notoriously the worst corner of the complex. People craned their necks. Some rummaged for their phones, anticipating a comedic spectacle or an underdog story. Travis Redford, seated among fellow riders on a side bench, leaned over to a friend and muttered, "Oh, they'll get a show all right. Let's see how long it takes before that Mustang panics." When Grace walked through the entry gate, the hush among the spectators was palpable. She wore a simple white shirt, crisp from a midnight ironing session. Lily had insisted upon, and her old cowboy hat, its brim frayed, color dulled by years of ranch labor. Yet, she carried herself with undeniable authority. Storm followed at her side, stride for stride, unattached to any lead rope. They moved in tandem as though they had rehearsed every step, though all they shared was a silent connection forged over years of mutual rescue and resilience. A soft orchestral piece began to play over the loudspeaker. Instead of the flashy upbeat tune typical for show jumping or reining contests, this was a classical composition. Low, measured strings that swelled with tension. Grace paused in the center of the arena, squared her shoulders, and gently placed one hand on Storm's neck. The Mustang stood poised, ears swiveling forward and back, reading the crowd, reading the music, and reading Grace. A few onlookers giggled softly, expecting an amateurish attempt. Others lifted their phones to record, waiting for the comedic meltdown or, at best, a clumsy demonstration from some unknown ranch. However, the snickers began to die down the moment Storm set his hooves in motion. He started with his shoulder end gliding elegantly along an invisible diagonal. There was hardly a sound. His hooves struck the dirt with a whisper of impact. Next came a side pass, crossing his legs in a sweeping lateral movement that seemed incongruously graceful for what many assumed to be a mere half-wild Mustang. Even those who weren't experts recognized an unusual smoothness in his transitions. Grace's posture remained upright, her back straight, her expression focused. She guided Storm with subtle shifts of her body weight, a tilt of the hip or a gentle squeeze of the calves. The effect was mesmerizing. A spin followed. Storm pivoted on his hindquarters with fluid precision, like a dancer executing an effortless turn. The crowd quieted, a stunned hush replacing the earlier murmur. By the time Grace led him into a PFA, an advanced move in which the horse appears to trot in place, lifting the front legs in rhythmic sequence, the entire stadium seemed to hold its breath. PFA was a technique that typically took years of classical training to master, often reserved for well-bred dress champions. The crispness of Storm's steps, his ears pricked attentively, and the ease with which he carried it out belied his supposed. In the stands, gasps escaped, parted lips, and more cameras rose to capture what was unfolding. Off to one side, Travis seethed in silence. Only minutes ago he had told a fellow rider to brace for laughter, but laughter was nowhere to be found. The hush that fell over the arena now was one of awe. A tall, well-dressed trainer near Travis muttered, "That can't be just any Mustang," while flipping through notes on his phone. Another whispered, "How is she controlling him so precisely?" Travis clenched his jaw, refusing to comment. Grace could feel Storm's heartbeat through her knees, felt the tension and readiness in his muscles. Every step resonated through her body as if the boundary between them dissolved. She decided, mid-performance, that she would show them the depth of that bond. Gently, she slowed Storm, guiding him back to the center of the arena. Then, in one deliberate motion, she released the reins from his bridle. A collective gasp rippled across the stadium. "What is she doing?" someone exclaimed. "She can't seriously attempt advanced maneuvers without a bridle or cross ties." The announcer's voice even faltered mid-sentence. Unsure how to narrate this startling development, a judge on the main panel leaned forward, adjusting his glasses in disbelief. Storm did not falter. The music's strings rose in a crescendo of suspense, and Grace took a steadying breath. She shifted her weight, pressed her knees lightly against his flank, and exhaled in a controlled, deliberate manner. Storm responded with a half-pass, stepping diagonally across the arena's center. The audience leaned in, as though collectively holding a single breath. Then came the levade. Storm rose on his hind legs, forelegs tucked, body balancing in near-perfect alignment. He lingered, suspended for a few heartbeats that felt like an eternity, until the hush of the crowd exploded into a scattered chorus of astonished gasps. In that moment, the bond between them was laid bare for all to see. The battered war veteran and the once-abandoned Mustang, united in a dance that transcended the typical confines of show-ring spectacle. As Storm's hooves touched down, Grace signaled one final pirouette. He spun gracefully, tail arcing like a brushstroke. The hush returned, thick with reverence, so profound that the quiet was more deafening than any cheer could have been. And then, with a barely perceptible cue, Storm slowed to a standstill at the center of the arena. His head dropped slightly, as if in a concluding bow, perfectly synchronized with Grace's bow from the saddle. The music ended on a sustained note, and for a heartbeat, no one moved or spoke. It was like a collective breath had been stolen. Then, as if a dam had burst, the stands erupted in applause, cheers and whistles that thundered against the rafters. People stood up, many leaning forward over the rails, clamoring to see more. A handful of onlookers had tears in their eyes. Grace blinked hard, a surging knot of emotion tightening her chest. She was not weeping for victory or validation, but for the joy of finally being seen. This was the feeling she hadn't known she was missing. Recognition that came not from pity or curiosity, but from genuine admiration. Storm flicked his ears, regarding the cheering crowd with quiet composure, as though it were only natural that they applauded. When the arena staff signaled for Grace to exit, she gathered the reins, not that Storm needed them, and rode out at a relaxed walk, the thundering ovation following them all the way. Lily waited by the gate, tears shining in her eyes. She grabbed Grace's hand the moment she dismounted. Oh my God. Grandma, Lily whispered, her voice shaky. You two were incredible. Grace tried to speak but found her throat too tight for words. Instead, she gave Lily a quick nod, then brushed her hand along Storm's neck in a silent gesture of thanks. If this was the only highlight of the entire journey, it might have been worth it. In the aftermath, the final echoes of applause still reverberated when an older gentleman approached them near the stable corridor. He wore a dark blazer and walked with a measured gait, eyes keen beneath bushy gray eyebrows. Thomas Granger, the head judge of the competition, had a reputation for fairness and a deep knowledge of equine lineage. He stopped a few paces short of Storm, scanning the horse's features from muzzle to flank. That was quite a performance, Granger began, voice low but resonant. But I have a question. He fixed Grace with a level stare. Do you have a certificate of origin for this horse? Grace stiffened, her earlier euphoria receding. No official papers. I found him near Timber Ravine about 4 years ago. She ran a calming hand over Storm's side as if to reassure him. No brand, no chip, no claim from anyone. Granger's stern expression didn't budge. I used to manage a breeding program called Celestial Pines. We worked with specialized lines, including some Andalusian crosses. There was a mare, Celestia, who vanished along with her unborn foal. His gaze slid to Storm's hindquarters, and she bore a distinctive mark on her flank, a crescent shape, faint but unmistakable. Without waiting for permission, the older man crouched beside Storm's right hind leg. Grace clenched her jaw in reflex, but Storm stood calmly as though sensing no threat. Granger brushed aside a tuft of hair near the upper thigh, and there it was, a pale crescent-shaped birthmark. He exhaled sharply, rising to his feet. Yes, he murmured, voice trembling with conviction. Yes, that's exactly the marking Celestia had. He paused, glancing from Storm to Grace. Whether by miracle or dark deed, I believe you found her foal. Grace exchanged a questioning look with Lily. The swirl of confusion, excitement, and a prickling sense of foreboding settled in her stomach. What do you mean by dark deed? she asked. But Granger's response was interrupted by the buzz of the crowd. Camera shutters snapping from onlookers eager to catch any drama unfolding near stall 29. "This is bigger than a simple champion horse, Miss Whitaker," Granger replied. Celestia was an extremely valuable broodmare, rumored to be part of an Andalusian line specially bred for heightened reactivity and intelligence. Traits used historically by cavalry. She vanished under suspicious circumstances. Many years officially, the story was a transportation accident that left no survivors, but some of us always doubted the account. Grace felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. A flurry of questions raced through her mind. Who had tried to erase Celestia? And why would Storm's existence threaten them? Before she could ask more, Granger gave a curt nod and said, "I'm going to speak with the competition board about the official standing. There may be a challenge to Storm's eligibility if certain parties realize who he is." He paused, then added softly, "For your own safety, watch your back." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Grace and Lily in a swirl of uncertainty. They barely had time to process the judge's words before an unexpected figure emerged behind the stable block. A bent, silver-haired man with a worn jacket and faded jeans. He stepped forward hesitantly, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Words spread in murmurs around them. "Is that Jeremiah Cole? I thought he left the breeding scene years ago." With trembling hands, the man reached Storm's side, stopping just short of touching him. Lily opened her mouth to speak, but Grace laid a gentle hand on her arm, sensing that this newcomer carried deep significance. Jeremiah's gaze traveled the length of Storm's flank, lingering on the crescent birthmark, eyes misting with tears. Slowly, he lifted one calloused hand and pressed it to the Mustang's neck. Storm closed his eyes, leaning subtly into the contact. Jeremiah Cole inhaled shakily. "You're her boy, aren't you?" he whispered. "Celestia's son." Then his voice cracked. "For years I thought you died along with her. We searched every pass, every ravine, but we found nothing." Grace felt a pang of empathy. This man's posture spoke of ruin and heartbreak. Shoulders bowed beneath regrets. "You knew Celestia," she said gently. "I did," Jeremiah confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "She belonged to me until I lost everything. My ranch, my livelihood. After she disappeared, Chuck Redford was in charge of transporting her to a breeding facility. He claimed an accident, said there was no trace of mother or foal. I never believed him, but I had no proof." Tears carved lines down his weathered cheeks. He turned to Grace, voice trembling. "Thank you for saving him." Storm shifted, pressing his muzzle into Jeremiah's chest, a gesture both curious and comforting. "I never thought I'd see a part of Celestia alive again." Just then, a commotion broke out near the center of the stabling area. Chuck Redford himself strode forward, flanked by a pair of ranch hands. His face was flushed, a vein pulsing at his temple. Seeing Jeremiah near Storm, Chuck's expression soured further. "What's this nonsense?" he barked. "Get away from that horse, Cole." Grace stepped protectively between Jeremiah and Chuck. "Seems your story about Celestia's disappearance isn't holding water," she said, voice cold. "Her foal's alive, and we have reason to believe you knew it all along." At that moment, Cole Anderson emerged from the crowd, clearing his throat loudly. The veterinarian's usually calm face was set in stern resolve. "I worked briefly for Redford Ranch last season," he announced, loud enough for onlookers to hear. "I overheard Chuck Redford giving orders to abandon a pregnant mare in the timber ravine. He said if the horse vanished, it would allow him to claim ownership of the Cole estate by default." A rumble of shock swept through the gathering. Travis Redford, standing a step behind his father, paled visibly. His cocky demeanor drained away as the hush of accusation enveloped them. Chuck glared fiercely at Cole, lips pressed into a thin line. But before he could respond, Travis spoke up, voice shaking. I heard it too," he confessed in a wavering tone. He told the driver if that mare died, then Dad would get the rights to everything. The final word escaped him like a guilty whisper he'd held in for too long. Faces all around them darkened with anger. Several horse owners, trainers, and spectators voiced outrage. "He tried to kill a pregnant mare. This is monstrous." Cameras flashed, capturing Chuck's thunderous scowl. Meanwhile, Storm flicked an ear, sensing the turmoil, but remaining composed by Grace's side. Thomas Granger reappeared, flanked by officials from the competition. "I've heard enough," Granger said, eyes blazing with quiet fury. Until we conduct a full investigation, Redford Estate is hereby suspended from the event and from all official breeding privileges. Chuck Redford, if these allegations are substantiated, you'll face permanent expulsion from the association. A murmur of approval and anger rippled through the crowd. Chuck made to argue, his mouth twisting into a sneer, but Travis, trembling, placed a hand on his father's arm. It was clear the younger man was no longer willing to defend him. Behind them, the ranch hands shifted uncomfortably, as though confronted with a truth they'd rather not see. Jeremiah Cole closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. Relief mingled with sorrow, overshadowed by the memory of Celestia lost. Storm, standing tall, lifted his head, ears swiveling like he recognized the resolution of a long-buried betrayal. Sunlight streamed through the rafters at just that moment, catching the swirl of dust in the air and framing Storm in a halo-like glow. He appeared both triumphant and hauntingly regal, the living testament to a dark secret revealed at last. Race let out a slow breath, glancing from Jeremiah to Cole Anderson, then to Lily, who looked on with eyes wide and glistening. The entire confrontation had the tension of a final act in a grand drama, yet it was only an interlude, a stepping stone to the next stage. Storm, unperturbed by the swirling accusations, seemed to stand as a calm center in a storm of revelations. As the officials escorted Chuck and Travis away, an unexpected hush fell. A cluster of spectators began to cheer, quietly at first, then more loudly. They applauded not just Grace's performance in the arena, but her moral victory over sabotage and cruelty. The sound echoed off the stable walls until it built into a small crescendo of support. Lily took Grace's hand, her voice trembling with pent-up emotion. "We did it," she breathed. "We cleared Storm's name." Jeremiah gave a solemn nod, reaching out to touch Storm's muzzle once more. Grace dismounted slowly, tipping her hat to the judges. Her eyes glistened, but she did not hide her emotion. Lily, who had been standing near the gate, ran into the arena, flinging her arms around her grandmother. "I knew you could do it," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and jubilation. "Now they all know too." It took nearly 3 minutes for the applause to taper off. When at last the announcer's voice returned, it was charged with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we will now take a short break before announcing the official results of the final round. Please remain in your seats." A short while later, the crowd reconvened for the awards ceremony. Horses and riders lined the center of the arena, while a panel of judges fanned out in front. One by one, accolades were distributed: best trainer, technical excellence, and so forth. Then came the major titles: Horse of the Year and Breakthrough Performance. The entire stadium went silent as Thomas Granger took the microphone. "This year's competition has been unlike any we've seen," he said, scanning the crowd. "We witnessed flawless technique, but we also witnessed a profound bond that transcended conventional training. In light of the horse's unique story and the rider's exceptional skill, while also considering the extraordinary display of trust and empathy, we hereby award both Horse of the Year and Storm Performance to Grace Whitaker and Storm." The crowd exploded in celebration. Lily practically sprinted to Grace and hugged her so tightly that Grace nearly lost her balance. Tears streamed down Lily's face. "I knew you had it in you," she whispered, "and now the whole world sees it too." Grace smiled through tears of her own. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about Chuck Redford's betrayal or Celestia's lineage. She was thinking about the path that had brought her here, her life of service, her lonely years, and the battered Mustang she'd rescued from a ravine. Suddenly, all the obstacles seemed to make sense, as if each had been a step leading her to this triumphant point. The awards ceremony ended and the crowd gradually began to disperse, still abuzz with the excitement of the day. Officials approached Grace with trophies and ribbons, wanting to snap photos of her and Storm. Lily rushed around, eager to coordinate everything. Through it all, Storm remained calm, flicking an occasional ear at the bustle, but otherwise content in Grace's presence. As the commotion died down, Jeremiah Cole approached. He carried a small bundle of papers in his hands, yellowed, folded documents that looked decades old. He cleared his throat politely. "Grace," he said quietly, "I've got nothing left but these scraps of a name. A few old deeds from Celestial Pines. Some records that were never fully recognized after the ranch went under." He hesitated, holding them out as though they were precious artifacts. But you have the heart that this bloodline deserves. Grace studied the fragile documents, sensing the weight of memory and loss behind them. Jeremiah's voice wavered. I've been thinking about how to restore Celestia's line the right way, not for profit or status, but to make sure that what happened to her, and to me, and to you, never happens again. Standing behind Jeremiah, Lily nodded fervently, eyes shining. He wants you to partner with him, Grandma. That means building something new with Storm at the center, where the horse's spirit matters more than any certificate. After a moment's reflection, Grace extended her hand to Jeremiah, meeting his gaze. I don't care about the money or the fame. I just care that we do right by these animals. If you're offering me a chance to make that happen, then I accept. A tremulous smile lit Jeremiah's face. Then let's make it official, he said, voice cracking with relief. And so they agreed to found a new enterprise, Whitaker Cole Horsemanship Ranch, a place where Storm's legacy would lead a renewed focus on compassionate training and rescue. Lily clapped her hands so excited she nearly jumped for joy. We'll show them all what a horse can be, she exclaimed, and what people can be too. Not long after the competition ended, a formal investigation was launched by both the Texas Horse Council and the National Equestrian Association. Witnesses stepped forward with statements about Chuck Redford's attempts to sabotage Storm, and new evidence came to light about how Celeste had vanished under suspicious circumstances. The more the investigators dug, the more damning the case against Chuck became. Within a month, Chuck faced multiple charges of animal cruelty, conspiracy, and fraud. The Redford estate was stripped of its breeding rights. Breeders across the state cut their ties, unwilling to risk association with the tarnished name. Travis, who had gone from boastful heir to disgraced accomplice, vanished from the equestrian scene. Rumor had it he left Texas altogether, presumably to avoid the public scorn, and possibly to escape the shadow of his father's crimes. Among the horse community, a new story circulated. No longer Storm, the worthless stray, but Storm the horse who brought justice. Grace rarely bothered to track the gossip, but Lily sometimes scrolled through online forums, where fans praised Storm's performance and championed the underdog who had overcome corruption. Occasionally, Grace would glance at those discussions and smile, though she preferred the quiet reality of the ranch to the noise of public opinion. By the time the official verdict came down banning Chuck Redford from any equestrian event or business venture, Grace had already moved on. For her, the real victory was Storm's transformation from a cast-off to a symbol of resilience, and the knowledge that honesty and compassion could still triumph over deceit. A year passed as though in a blink, yet the changes it brought felt monumental. Whitaker Horsemanship Ranch became a reality set on a tract of land that Jeremiah had once owned, but lost to debts. With the help of the local community and some sympathetic investors, mostly small donors touched by Storm's story, they reclaimed the property. The sign erected at the wooden gate read Whitaker Cole Horsemanship Ranch, where tradition meets heart. Springtime in southern Texas brought rolling green pastures dotted with wildflowers, a stark contrast to the dried-out terrain Grace once knew. The ranch now boasted three main areas: a sanctuary space for abandoned or rescued horses, a therapy center for veterans dealing with PTSD, and a specialized training ground where natural horsemanship took precedence over forced methods. Instead of stalls lined with bright ribbons and trophies, the ranch prioritized open pens, comfortable stables, and quiet corners where horse and human could establish rapport. Creaking oaks provided shade in the courtyard where visitors often gathered. Some were veterans like Grace, seeking an outlet for anxiety and trauma. Others came simply because they'd heard about Storm's miraculous journey. Whispers of, "He's the one who was nearly sabotaged, and he's the reason Chuck Redford got what he deserved," drifted through the ranch's daily life. Yet no matter their curiosity, most left with a deeper admiration for the Mustang and his quiet caretaker. On a late afternoon, Grace strolled along the newly repaired fence line. She paused to watch a group of volunteers leading 3 rescued horses from a battered trailer. The animals were visibly skittish, eyes wide with fear, but a sense of compassion radiated from the volunteers who approached them with gentle voices and calm gestures. It reminded Grace of her first days with Storm, how trust had to be earned, never demanded. "Grace," Jeremiah's voice rang out from near the main barn. She turned to see him waving a clipboard in the air. "We just got word from the local VFW hall. They want to set up a weekly program for veterans to visit and do equine therapy." "Sounds good," Grace replied, making her way over. "We'll need to make sure we have enough docile horses for them to groom and lead, at least at first." Jeremiah nodded eagerly, flipping through some notes. "I also want to expand the corral so we can accommodate more rescues. Maybe we can ask the community for another fundraiser." A flicker of pride warmed Grace's chest. The ranch was no longer just a personal refuge for her and Storm. It had evolved into a beacon of hope for both people and horses that needed healing. She patted Jeremiah's shoulder. "We'll make it happen." Time had also reshaped Lily from an eager teenager into a self-assured young woman of 7. She spent her days teaching children from the local town how to ride and care for horses, instilling the same gentleness and patience that Grace had taught her. Lily designed lesson plans that went beyond simple riding skills. She encouraged the kids to bond with the horses, to learn their language, and to treat them as partners rather than tools. One especially shy girl, Miranda, had a history of anxiety around large animals. She'd been in a minor horse accident once, leaving her with a pervasive fear. Lily guided Miranda day by day, introducing her first to the barn cat, then to a small pony named Maple, and eventually to Storm himself. While Storm was no longer the shining star of competitions, he retained a magnetic presence. Lily believed that if Miranda could find trust in him, she'd overcome her fear. The key moment came on a breezy spring afternoon. Lily led Miranda by the hand towards Storm, who grazed in a quiet paddock near the orchard. Storm lifted his head, ears swiveling as he registered their approach. Miranda froze about 10 feet away, trembling with nerves. Lily gave the girl's hand a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to do anything yet," she whispered. "Just watch him breathe. Notice how calm he is. Look at his eyes." Miranda steeled herself, then took another hesitant step forward. Storm remained utterly still, head lowered, a picture of non-threatening serenity. The girl lifted her small hand, inching closer until her fingertips brushed Storm's muzzle. His warm breath ruffled her hair, and in that fleeting instant, Lily saw something shift in Miranda's face. Fear, giving way to quiet wonder. Grace, observing from a distance, folded her arm. A rare smile lit her features as she witnessed the transformation. "That right there," she murmured. "That's the real reward." She thought back to her own initial connection with Storm in a ravine battered by wind and rain. Now, years later, he was still forging new bonds, still healing the wounds that people carried. Since his triumphant victory, Storm had not set hoof on a competitive stage. Newspapers and online outlets occasionally tried to interview Grace about returning to show circuits or breeding Storm for profit, but she always declined. If Storm was aware of any lost opportunities for fame, he gave no sign. Most days he ambled through the ranch's pastures with quiet confidence, occasionally training new foals in the subtle body language that horses used among themselves. In truth, the Mustang seemed to prefer his simple life at Whitaker Coal Ranch. Sometimes Lily would stand by the fence whistling a certain tune. Storm would lift his head from grazing and amble over, gently teaching younger horses to follow his lead. He still bore the faint scars from past injuries, signatures of a life that had nearly ended in tragedy. But now they lent him an air of nobility. Visitors came and went. Some stood outside Storm's enclosure for long stretches, not taking photos but rather watching silently, as though seeking a fragment of the calm, resilient spirit he radiated. A few wrote letters afterward describing how the sight of him gave them courage to face their own struggles, be it illness, grief, or the lingering shadows of combat. Grace sometimes marveled at how such a battered creature had grown into a beacon for so many. She would stand near the paddock, remembering the first time she laid eyes on him, a half-starved horse trembling by a rocky ravine. Her gaze would drift over the ranch's gently rolling hills, filled with rescued horses, learning to trust again. If there was ever proof that brokenness could be mended, Storm was it. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and red, Grace made her rounds, checking on the horses. She paused at Storm's pasture gate, leaning against the rails. The Mustang meandered up to her, nuzzling her shoulder in greeting. Warm gusts rustled the surrounding grass, carrying with them the faint smell of hay and earth. Grace rested her hand on Storm's withers, feeling the slow rhythmic rise and fall of his breath. In the distance, she could hear Lily's laughter as she conversed with a couple of new volunteers. The ranch was alive with renewal. human and horse alike finding their second chance. A sense of gratitude washed over Grace, mingled with the remnants of an old ache, a memory of the war-torn past she had once endured. Storm lowered his head, leaning lightly against her. She reached up and scratched behind his ear. "You remember that first day," she whispered, a tremor in her voice. "You could barely stand. I was no better off in my own way." The horse let out a soft snort as if acknowledging the reminiscence. Grace turned to face the sunset, the horizon stretching infinitely before them. It never was about winning or losing, was it? Storm, she thought, but the notion lingered in her mind unspoken. Instead, she voiced what truly mattered. "It was always about remembering who we are," she said aloud. "You and me both." Storm exhaled in a quiet huff, eyelids dropping contentedly. Grace pressed her cheek to the warm curve of his neck, letting the final rays of sunlight bathe them in a crimson glow. The wind whispered through the ranch, carrying the faint murmur of voices and the gentle shuffle of hooves as day slipped into dust. In that serene, fleeting moment, no words were needed beyond the silent shared truth that horse and woman had found their way home, together. "So you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us." Jenna smirked from across the fence, but Blair didn't flinch. She had faced worse in the field, and in her own mind, this was just another battlefield, but with eyes instead of bullets. Officer Reed watched in quiet awe. He'd seen many riders, many horses, but never this. Never that fierce, silent harmony between woman and beast. Officer Reed watched in quiet awe. He'd seen many riders, many horses, but never this. Never that fierce, silent harmony between woman and beast. The crowd shifted, murmuring with doubt and disbelief, but Blair breathed in deep, not to calm herself, but to remember who she was and what she'd fought through.